The ground shook again. Commander Veltar pressed his 6 hands against the cracked wall of what used to be the Planetary Defense Center. Above his head, chunks of metal and concrete fell like deadly rain. Each rumble meant another city was dying. Each flash of light in the dark sky meant thousands more of his people were gone forever. 3 days ago, the Zorathian homeworld had been peaceful. Children played in the crystal gardens while their parents worked in the floating towers that reached toward the clouds. The blue oceans sparkled under their golden sun, and the white cities hummed with the sounds of a civilization that had known peace for over 200 years. Now everything was burning. Veltar looked at the broken screen in front of him. The display flickered and sparked, but he could still see the terrible truth. Red dots marked where hegemony ships hung in space around his world like hungry predators. Each ship was massive, bigger than their largest cities. They looked like living things rather than machines, with dark organic hulls that pulsed with strange light. Biomechanical nightmares that had come from the depths of space to destroy everything the Zorathians had built. Commander, the last. "Orbital station just went silent," reported Lieutenant Keksavala. Her voice shook with fear. The young officer had been fresh out of the academy when the invasion began. Now she looked like she had aged 10 years in 3 days. "Station 7 stopped transmitting 20 minutes ago. They're all gone, sir." Veltar closed his compound eyes and tried not to think about the thousands of brave Zorathians who had died, defending those stations. They had fought with everything they had. Energy shields that could stop asteroid impacts, plasma cannons that could slice through battle cruisers, fighter squadrons with the best pilots in the sector. None of it had mattered. The hegemony ships absorbed their weapons like they were throwing pebbles at a mountain. The worst part was how the enemy fought. They didn't just destroy military targets. They took their time. They studied everything. They learned how Zorathian technology worked, how their society was organized, even how their bodies functioned. Then they used that knowledge to make the killing more efficient, more complete. Dr. Kexina crawled through the rubble toward Veltar's position. The old scientist had cuts on her face, and her silver fur was matted with dust and blood. She had been in the biology labs when the first attack came. The building had collapsed around her, but somehow she had survived. "Commander," she whispered, her translator device crackling with static. "I just got word from the evacuation sites. The ships are ready to launch, but we have a problem." Veltar turned to look at her. "What kind of problem?" "Space. The ships can only carry 10,000 people. Maybe 12,000 if we pack them in tight." Kexina's voice broke. "But we still have over 2 million civilians in the underground shelters." The number hit Veltar like a physical blow. 2 million. Families huddled in the dark tunnels beneath the capital city. Children who cried for parents who would never come home. Elderly Zorathians who remembered the old wars and thought they would never see such darkness again. All of them waiting for rescue that would never come. "We can't save them all," Veltar said quietly. It wasn't a question. It was the cruel math of extinction. "No, sir. We can't." Kexina looked at her damaged data pad. "The hegemony will start the final phase soon. They've taken everything they need from our cities and our technology. Now they'll sterilize the planet completely. Nothing will survive. Not even bacteria." Veltar had studied the reports from other worlds. The hegemony had destroyed 47 civilizations in the past century. They followed the same pattern every time. First, they would attack and overwhelm all military resistance. Then they would study the conquered species for days or weeks, learning everything about their biology, culture, and technology. Finally, they would harvest anything useful and eliminate all remaining life. No species had ever survived a hegemony. Harvest. Not one. "How long do we have?" Veltar asked. "Hours, maybe less." Kexina pointed toward the ceiling where the sounds of destruction grew louder. "They're already moving the harvest ships into position." Through a crack in the wall, Veltar could see the night sky. It glowed with an unnatural green light as the hegemony began positioning their largest vessels. The harvest ships were even bigger than their warships, biological monstrosities that could strip a planet down to its core, taking everything organic and leaving behind only dead rock. "What about the distress beacon?" asked Lieutenant Kexvala. "Are we still transmitting?" Veltar nodded. "Yes, but there's no point. No one has ever defeated the hegemony. Even if someone received our signal, they wouldn't come. They'd be too smart to throw their lives away on a lost cause." The irony was bitter. The Zorathians had been part of a loose alliance of peaceful species that shared technology and knowledge. They had treaties with a dozen different worlds. But when faced with the hegemony, all those friendships meant nothing. Every species knew the truth. Helping the victims of a hegemony harvest was just suicide. Another massive explosion shook the building. This time, pieces of the ceiling crashed down near where they were hiding. Veltar grabbed Dr. Kexina and pulled her behind a fallen support beam as debris rained around them. "Sir, we need to get to the evacuation site," urged Kexavala. "The ships won't wait much longer." Veltar knew she was right. As the commanding officer of planetary defense, he would be on one of those evacuation ships. His knowledge and experience would be valuable for the survivors who managed to escape. It was his duty to live, to help rebuild their civilization somewhere else. But the thought of leaving 2 million people to die made him sick. "Go ahead," he told his officers. "Get to the ships. Make sure the evacuation proceeds on schedule." "What about you, sir?" asked Dr. Kexina. "I'll follow soon. I want to try the emergency communication array one more time. Maybe we can reach, some of the shelter complexes, give them a final status update." It was a lie, and they all knew it. The communication arrays had been destroyed hours ago, but Kexina and Kexavala didn't argue. They understood that some people needed to stay until the very end. Some people couldn't live with themselves if they ran away while others died. The two officers made their way through the rubble toward the evacuation tunnels. Veltar watched them go, then turned back to the broken displays. The screen showed static mostly, but sometimes he could catch glimpses of the destruction above. Entire districts reduced to ash. The great museums where they kept the history of their people, all burning. The schools where young Zorathians learned about science and art and the hope for a better future, all empty and dark. He thought about his own family. His mate Valicia and their 3 children had been visiting her parents on the agricultural continent when the attack began. The farming regions had been hit first, before anyone knew what was happening. He had received one final transmission from her, just 5 words. "Take care of our people." Now their people were dying, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The ground trembled again, stronger this time. Through the cracks in the walls, Veltar could see the green glow getting brighter. The hegemony harvest ships were moving into their final positions. Soon, they would begin the process that would erase every trace of Zorathian civilization from the galaxy. Veltar sat down among the ruins and looked up at the dying sky. In a few hours, this world would be silent and empty. The crystal gardens would be gone. The floating towers would be melted down to nothing. The blue oceans would be drained dry. Even the bones of his ancestors would be dissolved and consumed. It would be as if the Zorathians had never existed at all. He closed his eyes and tried to remember better times, the sound of children laughing in the parks, the music that played during their seasonal festivals, the way the morning light looked when it reflected off the crystal spires of the capital city. Above him, the hegemony ships continued their work. Methodical, efficient, unstoppable. In the darkness of the ruined command center, Commander Veltar waited for the end of everything he had ever known or loved. Captain Jake Morrison stood in front of the huge window on the bridge of the UES Valiant. Outside, space looked empty and peaceful. Stars dotted the darkness like tiny diamonds. But Jake knew that somewhere out there, terrible things were happening. Entire worlds were dying while he watched the quiet beauty of the void. The Valiant was not like the sleek ships he had seen in old movies. It was 2 kilometers long and built like a weapon. Every line of its black hull said one thing: this ship was made for war. The engineers had not cared about making it pretty. They had cared about making it deadly. "Sir, we're getting that signal again," said Communications Officer Lisa Park. She sat at a console covered with glowing displays. Her fingers moved quickly across the controls as she tried to clean up the transmission. "It's definitely coming." From the Kepler 442 system. The same place our intelligence report said the hegemony attacked 3 days ago. Jake felt his stomach tighten. 3 days. That meant the invasion was probably almost over. The reports they had intercepted from other alien species all said the same thing about hegemony attacks. Fast, brutal, complete, no survivors. Humanity had only been listening to alien communications for 2 years. Before that, they had thought they were alone in the universe. Then Dr. Susan Martinez had figured out how to build a faster-than-light radio receiver. Suddenly, Earth was hearing voices from across the galaxy, dozens of different species talking about trade, science, art, and sometimes about the monsters that hunted them in the dark. The hegemony was mentioned in those transmissions more than any other threat. A species that consumed entire civilizations. They would arrive without warning, destroy all resistance, study everything about their victims, then strip planets bare of all life. 47 worlds had fallen to them in the past 100 years. Billions of intelligent beings gone forever. "What's our current position?" Jake asked his executive officer. Commander Kate Hayes looked at her tablet. She was a small woman with sharp eyes who had fought in 3 different wars before humanity reached the stars. "We're about 6 light years from the Kepler system, sir. At maximum speed, we could be there in 18 hours. Jake nodded slowly. 18 hours. Probably too late to save anyone, but maybe not too late to do something. Exactly what, he wasn't sure. The Valiant was just one ship, a powerful ship, but still just one against an enemy that had never been defeated. "Sir, if I may," said Chief Science Officer Ben Clark. He was young for his rank, but he had designed half the weapon systems on the ship. "Our intelligence on the hegemony is limited, but from what we've learned, their ships are biological, living creatures modified for war. That might give us an advantage." "How so?" Jake asked. "Living things can be hurt in ways that machines cannot. They need to eat. They can get sick. They have instincts that might be predictable." Ben pulled up a holographic display showing what little they knew about hegemony ship designs. "Also, biological ships might not be designed to fight something like us. We use projectile weapons, nuclear explosives, focused energy beams, most Alien species seem to prefer energy shields and plasma cannons. The hegemony might not know how to defend against kinetic weapons. Jake studied the display. The hegemony ships looked more like giant insects or sea creatures than spacecraft. They were covered in what appeared to be organic armor and had systems that looked grown rather than built. Everything about them seemed alien and wrong. "Sir," interrupted Lieutenant Commander Amy Ross from the tactical station, "I'm reading some interesting data from our long-range sensors. The distress signal from Kepler 442 is still broadcasting, which means someone down there is still alive." That changed everything. Jake had been thinking about this as a possible investigation, maybe a chance to gather intelligence on the enemy. But if there were survivors, then this became a rescue mission. "How strong is the signal?" he asked. "Weak and intermittent. Probably coming from an emergency transmitter in some kind of shelter. The main planetary communication grid appears to be destroyed." Amy paused, checking her readings. "Sir, there's something else. I'm detecting energy signatures consistent with hegemony bioships in that system. At least 15 of them, maybe more. 15 ships." Jake felt his mouth go dry. The largest space battle in human history had involved 5 ships total. The Valiant was tough, but it was not designed to fight 15 enemies at once, especially enemies that had destroyed every force sent against them for over a century. But somewhere on that dying world, people were hiding in the dark, sending out a signal that said they still hoped someone might come to help them. "Communications, patch me through to Earth Command," Jake ordered. Lisa Park worked at her console for several minutes, establishing the quantum link that would let them talk to Earth across dozens of light years. Finally, she nodded. "You're connected, sir. Earth Command, this is Captain Morrison aboard the UES Valiant. We have detected a distress signal from the Kepler 442 system. Request permission to investigate and render assistance." The response took almost a minute to arrive due to the vast distance. When it came, Jake recognized the voice of Admiral Frank Cooper, the man who had overseen the construction of the Valiant. "Negative, Valiant. Intelligence reports indicate that system is under hegemony control. Your mission is deep space patrol, not search and rescue. Return to your assigned patrol route immediately." Jake stared at the communication panel. He understood the Admiral's position. The Valiant was humanity's only Dreadnought-class starship. It had taken 5 years to build and represented the most advanced technology Earth possessed. Losing it would set back human space capabilities by decades. But somewhere in the Kepler system, innocent people were dying while he followed safe orders. "Earth Command, respectfully request clarification. Are you ordering us to ignore a distress signal from survivors under hegemony attack?" Another long pause. When Admiral Cooper's voice returned, it sounded tired. "Captain, I understand your position, but the hegemony has never been defeated. Sending our only Dreadnought against them is suicide. Think about your crew, Jake. Think about humanity's future." "I am thinking about humanity's future, sir." Jake looked around the bridge at his officers. They were all watching him, waiting to see what kind of man their captain really was. "If we run from this fight, what does that say about who we are? What does it say about what we stand for?" "It says we're smart enough to survive," came the Admiral's reply. Jake thought about that for a long moment. Maybe the Admiral was right. Maybe the smart thing was to turn around and head home. Maybe the smart thing was to let the Zorathians die while humanity built up its defenses and hoped the hegemony never found Earth. But Jake had not joined the military to be smart. He had joined to protect people who could not protect themselves. Earth. Command, this is Captain Morrison. Message received and understood. Valiant out. Jake nodded to Lisa Park, who cut the communication link. Commander Hayes stepped closer to Jake's command chair. Sir, what are your orders? Jake looked out at the stars again. Somewhere among them, an entire civilization was breathing its last breath. Maybe there was nothing he could do to save them. Maybe the Admiral was right, and this was suicide. But maybe, just maybe, there was a chance to make a difference. Set course for the Kepler 442 system, Jake ordered. Maximum burn. And Kate, send a message to all department heads. I want this ship ready for battle in 12 hours. What about Earth Command? Hayes asked quietly. What about them? They gave me an order to return to patrol. I'll return to patrol. After we check out this distress signal. Jake smiled grimly. Sometimes communications get delayed in deep space. By the time Earth Command realizes we're not following our assigned route, this will all be over one way or another. The bridge crew began implementing his orders with the efficiency that came from months of training together. The Valiant's massive. Engines came online, accelerating the ship toward a battle that would either make history or end in the death of everyone aboard. Ben Clark approached Jake's chair. Captain, there's something else you should know. The distress signal we're receiving, it's not random. Someone is actively transmitting, which means they're still fighting down there, still hoping. Jake nodded. Hope was a powerful thing. It could keep people alive in impossible situations. It could make them hold on just a little longer. Send out one more signal. Stay hidden for one more day. Maybe hope was exactly what humanity needed to bring to this fight. The end was coming fast now. Commander Veltar could feel it in the way the ground shook beneath his feet. The hegemony harvest ships had moved into their final positions above the planet. Soon they would begin the last phase of destruction, the phase that would erase every trace of life from his world. He sat alone in the ruins of the command center, watching the broken displays flicker with static. Most of his officers had made it to the evacuation ships. The lucky 10,000 would escape to carry on their species somewhere else in the galaxy. The unlucky 2 million would die here with their homeworld. Veltar had chosen to stay. Someone needed to maintain the distress beacon until the very end. Someone needed to witness what the hegemony did to his people. Maybe someday, other species would find the recordings and learn from what happened here. Maybe the Zorathians' deaths would not be completely meaningless. Above his head, the ceiling cracked and groaned under the weight of falling debris. The hegemony's harvest beams were getting stronger. Soon they would penetrate deep enough to reach the underground shelters where the civilians waited. Veltar tried not to think about the families huddled in the darkness below, parents holding their children close, elderly Zorathians telling old stories to help pass the time, all of them trusting that somehow, some way, rescue would come. But rescue never came, not from the hegemony. Veltar had studied every recorded attack for the past century. No one had ever survived a harvest. No one had ever even slowed the hegemony down. The communication panel next to him suddenly came alive with noise. Veltar looked at it in surprise. Most of the equipment had been dead for hours, but something was making the receivers activate. Something powerful was broadcasting nearby. He adjusted the controls, trying to filter out the static. Slowly, a voice became clear. It was speaking in a language he had never heard before, but his translator unit was working to decode it. This is the UES Valiant to any Zorathian forces still active. We have received your distress signal and are moving to assist. Please respond on emergency frequencies. Veltar stared at the panel. UES Valiant? He had never heard of any species called UES. And what did they mean by moving to assist? Nobody moved to assist during a hegemony harvest. That was suicide. With shaking hands, he activated the response transmitter. "This is Commander Veltar of Zorathian Planetary Defense. Unknown vessel. You must leave this system immediately. The hegemony harvest is nearly complete. There is nothing you can do to help us." The response came back quickly. "Commander Veltar, this is Captain Jake Morrison. We're human beings from the planet Earth. We received your distress call, and we're here to help. What's your current status? Human beings? Earth?" Veltar had never heard of either in all his years of studying galactic species. But there was something in the alien captain's voice that made him want to believe. Something that sounded like hope. "Captain Morrison, we have 17 hegemony bioships in our system. Each one is approximately 4 kilometers long. They have destroyed our entire military and are beginning final sterilization of the planet. We have 10,000 civilians evacuating in transport ships, but over 2 million more are trapped in underground shelters." A long pause. Then, "Understood, Commander. We're about to drop out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of your system. Hold your position and keep broadcasting. We're coming to get you." Veltar felt something he had not experienced in 3 days. A tiny spark of hope. But logic quickly crushed it. One ship, no matter how advanced, could not fight 17 hegemony vessels. This human captain was brave, but he was also leading his crew to certain death. On the surface above the command bunker, every sensor array that still functioned began screaming warnings. Something massive was approaching the system from deep space. But it was not moving like any known starship design. Instead of the smooth curves that most galactic civilizations preferred, this new arrival moved through space like a blade cutting through water. The hegemony collective consciousness, registered the newcomer with mild interest. Their biomechanical minds analyzed the approaching vessel and found it primitive by their standards, fusion-powered rather than biomechanical, built from dead metal instead of living tissue. The crew of approximately 800 beings posed. No threat to their superior numbers and technology. The hegemony had encountered thousands of different species over the centuries. They had absorbed the knowledge and destroyed the civilizations of races far more advanced than these newcomers. This would be a brief interruption, nothing more. Aboard the UES Valiant, Captain Jake Morrison studied the tactical display with growing concern. Chief Science Officer Ben Clark had been right about the bioships. They looked like living creatures that had been modified for war. Organic hulls that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. Weapon systems that appeared to have been grown rather than built. Everything about them seemed alien and wrong. 17 confirmed targets, reported Lieutenant Commander Amy Ross from the tactical station. The largest one is over 5 kilometers long. Sir, they're huge. What about the planet? Morrison asked. Ben Clark looked up from his science station. Massive ecological damage. Large sections of the surface appear to be burning. I'm reading energy signatures consistent with some kind of beam weapons designed to sterilize organic matter. He paused, his face grim. Captain, if we don't act soon, there won't be anything left to save. Morrison nodded. He had known this. Would be a desperate fight from the moment he made the decision to come here. The question was not whether they could win. The question was whether they could do enough damage to matter. Communications, open a channel to the hegemony ships, Morrison ordered. Lisa Park looked surprised. Sir? You want to talk to them? I want to get their attention. Put me through. A moment later, Lisa nodded. Channel open, sir. Morrison stood up from his command chair and spoke in a clear, strong voice. Attention, Hegemony Forces. This is Captain Jake Morrison of the United Earthship Valiant. You are conducting an unprovoked attack on innocent civilians. Cease your operations and withdraw from this system immediately. The response came quickly, but not in words. Instead, the three nearest hegemony bioships turned their massive forms toward the human vessel and opened fire with weapons that had reduced Zorathian cities to ash. Beams of energy that could crack continents struck the Valiant's deflector shields. The entire ship shuddered under the assault, and the lights flickered as the defensive systems absorbed the incoming fire. Shields down to 70%, reported Chief Engineer Carl Rogers from the engine room. But the new composite armor is holding. These weapons are designed to destroy organic matter, not our type of metallurgy. Morrison smiled grimly. Well, they definitely got our attention. Now let's get theirs. Amy, you may fire when ready. The UES Valiant had been designed with one purpose in mind, to fight enemies that humanity might encounter among the stars. The engineers had studied every piece of alien technology they could find and designed weapons specifically to counter the most common defensive systems used by galactic civilizations. Most alien species relied on energy shields and plasma-based weapons. The Valiant carried something different, something that had been proven effective in human conflicts for centuries. The ship's railgun batteries opened fire first. Hypervelocity projectiles, each weighing several tons and accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed, streaked across space toward the nearest hegemony bioship. The organic creature's shields, designed to deflect energy weapons, offered no protection against solid matter moving at relativistic speeds. The projectiles punched through the bioship's hull like bullets through tissue paper. They penetrated deep into the creature's organic core before exploding with nuclear fury. The bioship's death scream echoed across subspace frequencies as its entire nervous system overloaded and died. Aboard his command bunker, Veltar watched his sensor readings in complete disbelief. The human ship had just destroyed a hegemony vessel with its first attack. That was impossible. Nothing could kill a hegemony bioship that quickly, but the impossible was happening right in front of his eyes. The remaining 16 hegemony ships responded with typical efficiency. They abandoned their harvest operations and turned their full attention to this new threat. Biomechanical weapons that had terrorized the galaxy for over a century focused their fury on the single human vessel. The Valiant disappeared behind a wall of incoming fire. Energy beams, bioacid projectiles, and neural disruptors struck the ship from every direction. For a moment, Veltar thought the humans were dead. Then the wall of fire parted, and the black ship emerged, scarred but still fighting. Its weapons blazed with renewed fury as Captain Morrison and his crew showed the galaxy something it had never seen before. Someone was fighting back against the hegemony, and they were winning. The space around the dying planet turned into a war zone unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The hegemony collective consciousness, spread across 16 remaining bioships, focused its ancient intelligence on the human vessel with growing confusion. These primitive newcomers were fighting in ways that made no sense. Most species the hegemony had encountered followed predictable patterns. They used energy shields to defend and plasma weapons to attack. They fought in formations that had been proven effective over thousands of years. They retreated when faced with superior numbers. The humans did none of these things. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Valiant as his ship danced between the massive bio-vessels like a small fighter weaving through giants. The hegemony ships were enormous, but they were also slow, built for overwhelming firepower and biological efficiency, not for dogfighting with something as fast and unpredictable as the human Dreadnought. "Hard to port," Morrison ordered. "Bring us around behind that cluster of 3 ships, the Valiants." Engines roared as the ship twisted through space in a maneuver that would have been impossible for most vessels its size. The artificial gravity struggled to keep up with the violent turns, but the crew held on and kept fighting. Lieutenant Commander Amy Ross worked at her tactical station with deadly precision. "Sir, we have a clear shot at the lead bioship's engine cluster, nuclear torpedoes loaded and ready." "Fire at will," Morrison replied. 6 nuclear torpedoes streaked away from the Valiant, their guidance systems adjusting course as they flew toward their target. The hegemony bioship tried to intercept them with defensive fire, but the torpedoes had been designed to fight through enemy defenses. They weaved and dodged like living things, getting closer and closer to their target. The explosions lit up space like new stars being born. Nuclear fire washed over the bioship's rear section, burning through organic armor that had withstood plasma fire for centuries. The creature's propulsion organs failed, leaving it drifting helplessly as its biomechanical systems tried to repair the damage. But the Valiant was already moving to its next target. Commander Veltar watched the battle from his ruined command center with growing amazement. The human ship was not just fighting the hegemony, it was winning. Ship after ship fell to weapons that the bio creatures had no defense against. Solid projectiles that punched through their hulls like bullets through flesh. Nuclear explosives that burned their organic systems beyond repair. "Commander?" came a weak voice from his communication panel. It was Dr. Kexina, calling from one of the evacuation ships that had managed to escape the planet's atmosphere. "Are you seeing this? The unknown vessel has destroyed 4 hegemony ships already, 4 ships in less than an hour." "I see it," Veltar replied, his voice filled with wonder. "I still don't believe it, but I see it." The battle raged on. The hegemony had numbers, but the humans had something else. They had anger. Every shot they fired carried the fury of a species that had spent years listening to distress calls from dying worlds. Every maneuver they made was driven by the determination to stand between innocent people and the darkness that hunted them. Aboard the Valiant, Chief Engineer Carl Rogers monitored his systems with growing concern. The ship was taking tremendous punishment. Bioacid that could dissolve molecular bonds ate at their hull plating. Energy beams designed to disrupt neural networks interfered with their computer systems. Projectile weapons launched living creatures that tried to burrow through their armor. "Captain, we're taking heavy damage," Rogers reported over the intercom. "Hull breaches on decks 7 through 12. We've lost main power to the forward railgun batteries. And, sir, the experimental plasma lance is showing some concerning power fluctuations." Morrison absorbed the damage report without changing expression. They had known this would be costly. The question was whether they could inflict enough damage. Before the Valiant was destroyed, "How many hegemony ships are still operational?" he asked Amy Ross. 12, sir, but several of them are showing damage. That big one in the center looks like it's having trouble with its weapons systems." Morrison nodded. 12 ships was still impossible odds, but it was better than 17. Every hegemony vessel they destroyed was one less threat to innocent people across the galaxy. Every minute they kept fighting was another minute for the Zorathian evacuation ships to get farther away from this system. "Sir," interrupted Chief Science Officer Ben Clark from his station. "I'm detecting something interesting about the hegemony formation. They're not coordinating as well as they did at the beginning of the battle. I think we've damaged their command structure." Morrison turned to look at the tactical display. Ben was right. The bioships were still fighting, but they were acting more like individual creatures now instead of parts of a single organism. Their attacks were less coordinated. Their movements were more defensive. "What does that mean for us?" Morrison asked. "It means they're adapting to us, but slowly. And it means if we can take out the right ship, we might be able to disrupt their entire fleet." Amy Ross studied her targeting displays. "Sir, I think I know which one. That massive bioship in the center of their formation. It's been coordinating the others since the battle began. If we can destroy it, we might turn this from a coordinated attack into a confused mob," Morrison finished. "What would it take to kill something that size?" Ben Clark ran calculations on his computer. "Everything we have left, sir. All remaining nuclear torpedoes, full railgun barrage, and the plasma lance at maximum power." "The lance has never been tested at maximum power," warned Chief Engineer Rogers. "It could overload our entire electrical system." Morrison looked around his bridge at the officers who had followed him into this impossible battle. They were all watching him, waiting for his decision. Outside the windows, space burned with the light of dying bioships and exploding weapons. "If we don't take that shot, we're all going to die anyway," Morrison said quietly. "At least this way, we go down swinging." The decision made, the crew of the Valiant began preparing for their final attack. Nuclear torpedoes were loaded into every available launch tube. The railgun batteries that were still functional were charged to maximum power. And deep in the ship's core, the experimental plasma lance began building up energy levels that its designers had only dreamed about. The target was the largest hegemony bioship, a creature so massive it looked more like a small moon than a living thing. Its organic hull pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that seemed to communicate with the other ships in the fleet. Weapon systems that could sterilize planets bristled along its flanks like the spines of some deep-sea nightmare. "Sir, we're ready," reported Amy Ross. Morrison took one last look at the tactical display. 12 enemy ships against one human vessel. It should have been suicide. Maybe it still was. But sometimes the impossible happened when people refused to give up. "All weapons, fire," Morrison ordered. The UES Valiant unleashed everything it had in one concentrated barrage. 24 nuclear torpedoes streaked through space toward the massive bioship. Railgun projectiles followed behind them, moving so fast they appeared as streaks of light. And cutting through it all came the plasma lance, a beam of energy so intense it turned space itself into a weapon. The hegemony command ship tried to defend itself. Energy barriers that could stop stellar radiation flared to life around its hull. Point defense weapons that had destroyed entire fleets opened fire on the incoming attack. Biomechanical systems that had evolved over millions of years worked desperately to preserve the creature's life. None of it was enough. The nuclear torpedoes arrived first, their explosions overwhelming the bioship's defenses and opening holes in its organic armor. The railgun projectiles followed, punching deep into the creature's vital organs. And then the plasma lance struck, burning through 4 kilometers of biomechanical tissue in less than 10 seconds. The death scream of the hegemony command ship echoed across every communication frequency in the system. Veltar heard it in his bunker and felt something he had never expected to feel again. Hope. Real hope that his people might actually survive this nightmare. On the bridge of the Valiant, alarms blared as systems throughout the ship began failing. The plasma lance had drained their power reserves and damaged their electrical grid. But through the smoke and sparks, Captain Morrison could see the tactical display clearly enough to know they had succeeded. The massive Hegemony command ship was breaking apart, its biomechanical systems failing as the creature died. And around it, the remaining 11 bioships were acting confused and disorganized, like a pack of animals that had suddenly lost their leader. The humans had done the impossible. They had made the Hegemony bleed. The death of the Hegemony command ship changed everything. For the first time in over a century, the biomechanical collective that had terrorized the galaxy found itself confused and leaderless. The remaining 11 ships moved through space. Like lost animals, their coordination broken and their ancient confidence shattered. Captain Jake Morrison watched the tactical display through smoke-filled air as damage reports flooded in from every section of his ship. The UES Valiant was hurt badly. Hull breaches leaked atmosphere into space. Electrical fires burned in 3 different compartments. Half their weapons were offline, and their main engines were running on emergency power. But they were still alive, and more importantly, they were still fighting. "Sir, the Hegemony ships are regrouping," reported Lieutenant Commander Amy Ross. Her voice was hoarse from breathing smoke, but her hands remained steady on the tactical controls. "They're forming a new attack pattern. Looks like they're adapting to our weapons." Morrison nodded grimly. He had hoped that destroying their command ship would send the Hegemony running, but these creatures had survived for millions of years by being adaptable. They were learning from this battle, figuring out how to counter human tactics. "How long before they coordinate another attack?" Morrison asked. "Maybe 10 minutes, sir. They're moving slower now, but they're still dangerous." Chief Engineer Carl Rogers' voice crackled over the intercom. "Captain, I need at least 30 minutes to get our main weapons back online. The plasma lance completely fried our power distribution grid. We're running on backup systems that were never designed to handle this kind of load." Morrison felt the weight of the situation settling on his shoulders. 10 minutes before the enemy attacked again. 30 minutes needed for repairs. The math was simple and brutal. "Sir," came a weak transmission from the planet's surface. It was Commander Veltar, still broadcasting from his ruined command center. "Captain Morrison, our evacuation ships have reached the edge of the system. They're safe. Whatever happens next, you saved them. You saved my people." For a moment, Morrison felt a spark of satisfaction. 10,000 Zorathian civilians were alive because his crew had been willing to fight an impossible battle. That was something. That was worth dying for. But the fight was not over yet. "Commander Veltar, how many civilians are still trapped on the surface?" Morrison asked. A long pause. "Over 2 million, sir. They're in underground shelters, but the Hegemony harvest beams will reach them soon. There's no way to evacuate them in time." Morrison looked around his damaged bridge. His crew was watching him, waiting for orders. They had already done the impossible by destroying 6 Hegemony ships and disrupting their command structure. No one could ask them to do more. But Morrison had not come this far to give up now. "Ben, what's the status on our remaining nuclear weapons?" Morrison asked his science officer. Chief Science Officer Ben Clark checked his displays. "We have 12 nuclear torpedoes left, sir, plus the emergency charges we use for hull breaching operations. How big are those emergency charges?" "Each one is equivalent to about 50 kilotons. We carry 20 of them." Ben paused, understanding what his captain was thinking. "Sir, if you're considering what I think you're considering, it would be incredibly dangerous." Morrison was indeed considering something that most people would call insane. The hegemony bioships were tough, but they were still living creatures, and living creatures had vulnerabilities that could be exploited by someone desperate enough to try. Amy, plot me a course straight through the middle of the hegemony formation. Maximum speed. Amy Ross stared at him. Sir, that would be suicide. They'll concentrate all their fire on us. That's exactly what I'm counting on, Morrison replied. If they're all shooting at us, they're not shooting at the planet. Commander Kate Hayes stepped forward. Jake, what are you planning? Morrison turned to face his executive officer and oldest friend. Kate, I want you to take half the crew to the escape pods. Get them away from the ship before we make our attack run. I'm not abandoning my post, Hayes said firmly. It's not abandoning your post. It's following orders. Morrison's voice carried the weight of command. Someone needs to survive to tell Earth what happened here. Someone needs to carry word back to humanity about what we learned. Hayes shook her head. We're all staying, Jake. We came here together and we're finishing this together. Morrison looked around the bridge. Every officer was nodding in agreement. They had all made their choice. They would see this through to the end, whatever that end might be. All right then, Morrison said quietly. Let's give the galaxy something to remember. The plan was simple and completely insane. The Valiant would charge straight into the heart of the hegemony formation, using its remaining nuclear weapons to cause as much damage as possible. At the same time, they would overload their fusion reactors to create an explosion large enough to destroy every bioship in the immediate area. It was a suicide mission, but it was also the only way to save the 2 million civilians trapped on the planet below. Sir, the hegemony ships are moving into attack formation, reported Amy Ross. They'll be ready to fire in 5 minutes. Then we go now, Morrison decided. All hands, this is the captain. Prepare for combat acceleration. We're going in. The UES Valiant's damaged engines roared to life, pushing the ship forward at speeds that made the artificial gravity struggle to compensate. The ship shot through space like a black arrow, heading straight for the cluster of bioships that had reformed after losing their command vessel. The hegemony collective consciousness registered the human ship's approach with confusion. This was not a tactical maneuver. This was a death charge. But why would these creatures throw their lives away when they could escape to fight another day? The biomechanical minds that controlled the hegemony fleet could not understand the concept of sacrifice for others. In their millions of years of existence, they had never encountered a species willing to die to protect strangers. It was beyond their comprehension. That incomprehension would be their downfall. The Valiant plunged into the hegemony formation like a missile. Bioships that were each 5 times larger than the human vessel opened fire with everything they had. Energy beams that could crack planets struck the Valiant's failing shields. Bioacid projectiles ate through armor plating. Neural disruptors tried to interfere with the ship's computer systems. But Morrison and his crew pressed on. Nuclear torpedoes launched from every available tube, streaking toward the bioships at point-blank range. The remaining railgun batteries fired continuously, pumping solid projectiles into organic hulls. Emergency hull-breaching charges were launched like improvised grenades, exploding against the enemy vessel's vital systems. Hull breach on Deck 3, reported Damage Control. Fire in Engineering Section 2. Life support failing in Sections 7 through 12. Keep us on course, Morrison ordered. His hands gripped the command chair as the ship shook under the enemy barrage. Around him, control panels exploded in showers of sparks, and several crew members slumped over their stations. Sir, we're at the center of their formation, Amy Ross called out. All remaining nuclear weapons are away. Morrison nodded. This was it. The moment that would decide whether 2 million innocent people lived or died. "Carl, overload the fusion reactors," Morrison commanded. "Full power to the plasma lance. I want to take as many of these things with us as possible." In the engine room, Chief Engineer Rogers began the sequence that would turn their ship into a bomb. The fusion reactors that powered the Valiant began building up energy levels far beyond their safety limits. Alarms screamed throughout the ship as systems began failing under the incredible strain. But the plasma lance came online one final time. The beam that emerged from the UES Valiant was unlike anything that had ever been seen in galactic warfare. Fed by overloading fusion reactors and the determination of 800 human beings who refused to surrender, it cut through 3 hegemony bioships like a sword through paper. The explosions came seconds later. 20 nuclear torpedoes detonated, simultaneously creating a miniature star in the heart of the enemy formation. The bioships closest to the blasts simply vaporized. Those farther away were crippled by radiation and electromagnetic pulses. And then the Valiant's fusion reactors reached critical mass. The explosion lit up the entire system, on the planet. Below, Commander Veltar watched through his sensors as a new sun briefly appeared in space above his world. When the light faded, 12 hegemony bioships were gone. Simply gone. The 5 remaining bioships hung in space, damaged and leaderless. For the first time in their species' history, they faced an enemy that had been willing to die rather than let innocent people suffer. It was a concept so foreign to their nature that their collective consciousness could not process it. Slowly, almost hesitantly, the surviving hegemony ships began to withdraw from the system. They retreated, not because they had been defeated, militarily, but because they had encountered something they could not understand or counter, the human willingness to sacrifice everything for others. Commander Veltar sat in his ruined command center and watched the impossible happen. The hegemony, terror of the galaxy for over a century, was running away. They were leaving his world and his people alive.